As noted, I'm doing something a bit different this year. In the past, I've always kind of done like a state of sports technology, which was fun. But this year, I decided to change it up a bit. And so, I think your agenda says I'm doing something, and I'm going to change it up and do something else. So, but it's in line with what the agenda says. So what I want to do actually is to take the kind of spirit of what the agenda says and apply it to launching a product, which I think is ultimately what you are all attempting to do on a regular basis, is to launch products. And so this is focused on launching a sports technology product, but I think you'll find that in a lot of ways it carries over to pretty much anything you try to launch from a product standpoint. So I'm going to start with an email that I received last week from a company that I wrote a post about last week. And it was a very, very long, very, very angry email. But basically it got summed up in these two lines here, that they said I killed their business, and they might as well go ahead and shut down their entire business. So, it's ironic because I thought it was actually quite a nice post, but apparently it wasn't. So the purpose of this is to kind of tell you how not to get in that situation. And I think the one-line version is just launch a good product. If you launch a good product, then generally speaking, you won't get in the situation. But there's a lot of ways to get to the launching part that can make your life easier. So the first piece is to kind of understand where I fit in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different media groups, and then where I fit into a media group. Paul, the PR person that was just here a moment ago, would label me as an influencer, right? Someone who can influence a lot of different things. Every media outlet, magazine, publication follows me on Twitter, on what I write. Doesn't matter if it's the New York Times or the BBC, they're following what I say. Now they won't necessarily talk about me, right? But they'll follow what I say and basically follow those trends. In the same way that every retailer and buyer distributor does the same thing. So again, I'm influencing those, but if you go to REI's site, they won't say DC Rainmaker somewhere, but behind the scenes, REI prints off all my reviews and decides based on that and my product recommendations as to what they'll carry, right? And that's just a simple example of something that influencers may not be totally visible, in front of things, but behind the scenes they're making stuff happen. Most importantly is that all the PR stuff that you guys just got told there, I don't tend to follow that script very well. So I usually throw that script out and kind of beat by my own drum there. So that's something to keep in mind, but that doesn't mean those points aren't valid. In fact, I would argue with really nothing that Paul said. I think he had a lot of great points and a lot of great ways to approach the media. And you'll see how I've kind of taken what he's talked about and twisted into how to approach me and to approach other sports technology and sports folks in our industry. Last but not least, who I actually write for is consumers. It's everyday people. I'm not writing for you in this room. I'm not writing for the BBC or someone else to follow me, and I'm not writing for REI or someone else to read my content and decide what to carry. I'm writing for consumers, and I'm in particular writing for really basically like 7 people, roughly. Now it sounds silly, these are all real life people that have no idea I've just put their name up on the screen, but these are people that are in my real life friends and family, and this is who I'm writing about when I'm writing a product. I'm looking at these names and seeing how does something fit into one of these categories. Phil is a friend of mine. He was in Paris this past summer. We did the Paris Triathlon together, very competitive cyclist, and so when I was putting together my Edge 520 post, I was thinking about how would he use that product. Not necessarily about how Lauren, his wife, would use the product. She's a different person. She's still a triathlete. She's still a middle-of-the-pack runner, but she's not likely to use a lot of the features like Strava and things like that on the Edge 520. Instead, she just wants to go out and ride. And the same with Mark. Mark is very much like Phil, but more of a commuter cyclist and not someone who's really going to do a lot of races. And his wife, Man, is not going to do any races at all. She's not going to be out there running, a 10K race or anything. She's just being healthy. And so if I'm looking at a product that's a wrist-based wearable, how am I appealing to what she's interested in? And I can go down the list, my mom, my dad, the girl, my wife, each of those people I'm writing towards the different segments. So that's something that, I'm not looking at just the pure performance athlete like we talked about this morning. Instead, I'm looking at who is that product for. So if I review a $100 GPS watch, it's very different than a $400 or $500 GPS watch. So it's probably a bit small from way back there, but you got to understand the media landscape before you can understand that blogging landscape or whatever you want to call it. At the top, you have traditional mainstream media, things like the New York Times, BBC, ESPN, CBS, all that jazz. Then you've got mainstream sport magazines, so Runner's World, Bicycling, Triathlete, Men's Health, stuff like that. Then you have tech media, Verge, Engadget, TechCrunch, Wired, and so on. There's plenty in that category. And then you have blogs. Now, in a lot of ways, tech media, they're all technically blogs. They all have RSS feeds and all that jazz, but we kind of put them in a different category than blogs. And blogs would be me, but it's also cycling tips, Bike Radar, Velo News, the companies and organizations that actually cover your segment, whether you want to call them a blog or a sports technology publication or just a sports publication that now has a blog. Doesn't really matter, but it's in that category. And then below there you have kind of the non-written social media. And by that I mean that it could be pictures, it could be YouTube videos, it could be things on Facebook. And that's a very important and growing group of people. And I'll kind of talk about what those people do and how that might influence your product plans. In order to engage each of those groups, you have to know what they actually care about. You have to know essentially how they make money, because that's what all those groups really care about. They care about money, or they care about some sort of recognition, right? So if you start off at the top, mainstream media, they're caring about views, viewership, and subscriptions. So an interesting story to them isn't because the story is interesting, it's because they want to get viewership, right? In the same way that mainstream magazines, online is views, in paper is subscriptions, but it's paid ads. That's basically what they're after, is how do they get paid ads for magazines, because that's what drives their profitability. The actual subscription piece and online ads isn't really that much in the grand scheme of things. In tech media, it's views. It's all about views. It's all about number of views that a site gets so that they can get more advertising impressions. That's the key thing there. You're seeing more and more limited paid content with some of these big sites that have experimented with it over the last, say, 6 to 12 months. So that's something that is changing a little bit there, but it's primarily views. So they want stories, they want lots of stories so they can go ahead and carry that through. Then you get into blogs, and this is where it gets really tricky. So blogs want views, but by and large, the numbers when you go through like advertising rates and things like that, for most blogs, doesn't work out. It's not terribly profitable. Instead, they have to supplement that income some other way. So if you look at a lifestyle blogger, and I'll talk about that in a second, what that is, that's about paid content. That's about paid sponsorship or a paid post in some way, shape, or form, versus another publication that may be about sponsoring the entire site for a period of time, like Slow Twitch, for example, in the triathlete world. You can pay to sponsor Slow Twitch as a site for a period of time, and everything is all about your product for that period of time. So they're not paying on a per advertising basis anymore. They're paying on sponsoring the entire site, because it's, again, doing impressions doesn't really work out for most people when you're talking low volumes. If you have 500,000 views a month, you can't make money on impressions. It's just, people always say, well, just advertising on the side of the post or whatever. There's not much money in advertising. So what are lifestyle blogs? And this is what's probably interesting to you. These used to be called mommy blogs, and that's probably the term that most people are familiar with. But as you'll find out, it's far from just mommies anymore. It's all assortment of people, and it's basically folks that are recounting their lives, and you can potentially pay to enter that view. When I started out, I would be technically categorized as a lifestyle blogger, right? That was something I talked about, what I ran and or what I ate and where I ran, all that jazz, and nothing product-wise. It was just simply, here's what I did this weekend. Now, though, it's all about sponsor content within that. So now it's about sponsor posts and pre-written posts and YouTube videos. Like if you go into YouTube, there's no YouTube star out there today, none, not a single one, that makes their money on advertising dollars. Every single one of them, even the ones that have 3 million or 5 million followers, are doing it based on sponsored engagements. They're doing it based because a company has sponsored them to say a message. And that's, again, you can't make money on YouTube just on views. You have to have something behind the scenes. And so if you're looking at talking to people in that world of kind of social media, they're basically looking for a check. They're looking to talk about your product for a check, which is a little bit different than a sponsorship, which we'll talk about in a second. The key to figuring out if something is sponsored media in the lifestyle world is a hashtag. That's like the dead giveaway, because most of those folks are asked to put hashtags on something, or sometimes they'll ask to put, the product is paid for, but the opinions are my own, right? And the opinions are my own piece is the dead giveaway, because it's really impossible for someone to write this product completely and totally sucks when someone just paid $1,000 for that post behind the scenes. And that's a cheap going rate, by the way. If you look at what blogs cost for viewership, and there are sites out there that do that, $800 to $1,000 doesn't buy you much in the visibility sphere. So like for a blog my size, if I was to charge per post, be tens of thousands of dollars to get that sort of visibility, right? So that's the thing to keep in mind, versus that's why when people talk about what are mommy blogs, it's that you're going further down the spectrum, you're paying a smaller amount, but you're trying to go grassroots instead. Paid trips are most common for lifestyle blogs, and I'll talk about that a moment as well when I give examples. So I'm going to give examples of product launches and kind of walk through those. Should be a little bit fun. And then last but not least, return of investment for this sort of thing tends to be better than a pro athlete. And the reason is that you're getting down to people that other readers can relate to, right? So, they're following someone online and they're following their every moment in life, and they're going to relate to that person better than a pro athlete. But there are still many reasons you might want to sponsor an athlete. The first that you've got to decide is whether you want to sponsor someone that's a professional or an age grouper. Two different use cases, and sometimes that's called sponsored or ambassador. Ambassador is now the new term for sponsored, because sponsored sounds like you're being paid out. So basically they call them ambassadors now. But the concept is the same. You're potentially paying someone in kind of one of two buckets. Either A, you're paying them to use their product by giving them free product, or B, you're paying them cash based on results. So if you go to a pro athlete, they're likely going to want cash based on results and some sort of sponsorship agreement. If you go to a age grouper, they're going to want basically free product and maybe a discount for friends and families and things like that. When you're looking at sponsorships, you need to decide what you want to get out of it. Is it product validation? Is it marketing? Is it trying to get the word out? If it's product validation, then a pro athlete is the best way to go, because they're going to be able to, you can put on your marketing later on, X athlete uses our product and he or she went to the podium and whatnot, right? That's product validation, and it worked just fine. So if you look at SRAM with their ETAP system, right? All of their efforts there are primarily product validation efforts. It's to be able to say that when they went to launch, that this product has worked. It worked in the Tour de France. It worked for this World Championship Series. It worked for this and that. That's all about product validation. Versus having that athlete stand up and say, I used X product or Y product. That's much more difficult to get something out of. That's an arrangement that rarely works. I mean, just think about it. You've gone to a local race and you've competed, and maybe you end up on the podium, maybe you didn't. But when you looked up at the podium and you saw your local age group athlete there, or local semi-pro or even pro athlete, did you actually look at their jersey and look and see what their sponsorships were on the back of their jersey? No, there's a gazillion little ads there, and you don't care at all. So you've got to decide what your goal is in sponsoring something or sponsoring an athlete. So looking at sports technology media, it's funny, there's really only like 10 to 20 different sports technology outlets out there, or the outlets that would cover sports technology in the sporting world, right? So sure, you'll get Engadget or the occasional New York Times that will cover a product in this world, but by and large you won't. Most of the people in this room, you're focused on bicycling or running world or things like that, or the online equivalencies. So when it comes to getting press with one of us, the easiest way, by and large, or far and away, is demos. I mean, demos. That's where, if I look at all of the majority of the posts that I do, it's because I've used a product and used it in person. And if you look at the majority of coverage from, Bike Radar to Velo News to Running Magazine and all the different groups, it's because they've used the product. And there's really three ways you can go about that. One is that you're coming to me, or you're going to a media outlet's office, and you're running through the product there. You're showing them that your product actually does work. Two, you could have me go to your headquarters, and that's valuable as well, because I can see how your operation works and see how your company works. And as Paul talked about earlier, trying to establish a storyline there, and so that's something that I can talk to what your company is doing, and you tend to have a lot more people on staff that can talk to different topic areas. So that's really valuable. And then three, there's going offsite somewhere else, which is very, very popular as well. So that's something where you're taking a group of journalists and you're going to an offsite location for 1 to 3 days typically, and you're running through the product. The challenge with that, of course, is that you have to arrange that entire event, and it tends to be a bit of a tricky thing to do. When you look at kind of the cadence of how those events work, typically there's PowerPoint briefs up front for the morning, and then you go out for a ride or a run, and then later in the day you download that data and look at and analyze it, and this is where the company tells you how the data should or shouldn't look, and whether it did or didn't work, and then you have dinner or whatnot, and potentially repeat the entire process the next day. From my standpoint, I tend to prefer either people just coming straight to me, because that's easier on a time standpoint, or going somewhere and riding with the product. I don't particularly care where that is, but I want to be able to run, ride, swim, whatever it may be with the product to be able to show it's good. And I think that's actually true across almost all of my peers. I don't think there's many of the people that write about your products that don't want to test it first. I think so. It's really something you need to keep in mind. So I'm gonna give some examples, because case studies are way more fun than talking about nebulous things. So I've got basically 3.5 categories of well-executed product launches. Basically a good, bad, and then middle ground, and a Hail Mary, right? Here's what a Hail Mary looks like and why you should or shouldn't potentially do it. But of course, you got to understand what is the purpose of a product launch. And it's, one, to increase awareness of a product. You're trying to ensure that there's no misinformation, yes, but also no missing information. If consumers get tiny tidbits of information about a product and they can't find the details they want, then a lot of times they won't actually buy that product. They'll just simply move on and forget about it. And it's to go ahead and get them to execute on that decision. You want to get them to actually buy something. That's your goal. Now, it may not be your something that they buy, but maybe they decide after you've launched the product that it's not the right product for them, and they're going to buy something else. But your goal as a company should be to get them to buy something, and thus eventually ship something, hopefully shortly thereafter, or not a year or two later. A good product launch will make it easy for a customer, or easy for your consumer, to check off all those 3 to 5 things up top there. A bad product launch will make that tricky. So just one thing to keep in mind before I go through this. Remember that I'm giving these in the spirit of learning. So is this my favorite poster from despair.com? I've actually bought the poster. It simply says, mistakes, it could be that the purpose of your life is only to serve as a warning to others, right? So think about this in product launches, right? The purpose of what I'm about to show you is just to explain how to and to not to launch a product. So we'll start off with the good ones first. And now I'm talking about good product launches in the sense of how they've worked with me or how they work with other journalists. In a lot of cases, they work with me the same as other journalists. I'll give this example here first of the Wahoo Element. It's a bike computer that was announced at Interbike about 2 weeks ago. Now, when the company Wahoo Fitness first talked about the Element, it was over a year ago. They talked to me about it. And at that point, I was able to give them some thoughts on where the product was going, the direction, and kind of some suggestions. They were free to follow them or not follow them, and they followed some and they didn't follow others, and that's fine. But it gives them that chance to get that feedback. The same is true of most other journalists in the sports technology world. If you talk to the guys from Bike Radar or Velo News or Global Cycling Network, all those guys are talking to companies a year plus for products. And given initial feedback, they may not go for a ride with it. They may just simply sit down at a trade show and show how something works. That's very, very common. I then met them at Eurobike, so that's 2 weeks before Interbike, and we did a couple rides there with the product where I had it and I could use it as I saw fit. And then they took the product with them, and I wasn't able to have it then for another 2 weeks. And then 2 days before Interbike, we met again, and they gave me a prototype that I could use and do my final photographs on, as well as go ahead and prepare my post on. So in this case, it wasn't an in-depth review, obviously, because it's not something I had a lot of time with. It's just a first look. It's just here's how this product roughly works, and then what a customer might think about it. Probably the most interesting thing here, actually one quick mention, I technically had a launch exclusive, but actually for me, I don't particularly like launch exclusives. I don't know, I guess for me, I don't want to be on the other side of that equation where someone else has a exclusive. I also think exclusives from your standpoint hurt you more than they help you. So if you promise a reporter that you can have an exclusive to announce on Tuesday, and then the rest of the world is on Wednesday, the internet doesn't work like that, right? As I'll explain to you in a minute, the internet is global and it works on the same time thing where basically when you announce something on Tuesday, the rest of the world gets it on Tuesday. So if you go to Wednesday, a reporter won't bother to cover you anymore because that was yesterday's news, right? So exclusives, to me, are a waste of your time. I'm happy they decided to give me exclusive chance to play with the product, but it doesn't impact my reviews, and honestly, I'm not a big fan of it. Probably the biggest thing Wahoo did correctly, though, is they assigned someone on their team to follow up to every single comment that was written on my post. So every single comment, someone followed up and said, yes, no, this is working, this is not working. And that, if you go look at those comments over the course of a few days, people are so excited about the fact that the company was actually responding to the requests. And it doesn't mean you have to respond on my site, but you can respond on many other sites out there. It's not hard to really cover the sports technology world and assign someone to go ahead and respond to consumers. It shows you're engaged, it shows you're interested. Next, we got the PowerTap P1s. You'll see a very similar trend to what Wahoo did. In this case, I saw the product well over a year ago now, and they provide some initial feedback on what things did and didn't work. They had a private event attached to a Tri-Expo in Germany back last, I think, February roughly. And then there was like a 2-week embargo on it. And that's when they went to the US and did the same thing for US media outlets. And then we all had a launch date on a given date 2 weeks in advance. Generally speaking, I prefer embargoes being out a few days. I hate if I go to an event and I have to, like, it launches the same day. That means I can't write really anything very, very good. At the same time, if an event is too big, then there's going to be leaks in the number of journalists there. So you want a smaller event. And this sort of thing within the power meter world is very common. Garmin did it with Vector, brought, I think, about 8 or 10 of us to the Vector launch, and went to somewhere in Colorado, and we spent 2 days riding it and got to ask questions, and then the launch was, I believe, about a week later. So that gave us time to analyze data, gave us time to get photographs edited and text written and all that kind of stuff. That works very well as a small group of people as opposed to being a big group of 50 or 60 journalists. They then had 2 separate ride camps, one in the US and one in Germany, later in March, I think it was, in April, roughly. And that's where the chance we finally got to be actually on the bike with it. So in their case, they split that event. A lot of companies will actually combine those together where it's all in one shot, but their timeline-wise, they just didn't have that number of units available. But that was fine. So then I went there and was able to ride with it and try things out for 2 days. And then finally, they shipped me a unit ahead of retail availability, about 2 weeks ahead of when they started shipping roughly, which meant that about a month later, I was able to go ahead and put a review out. Versus if you ship me something after availability, then it takes me longer to get to a review. And also, like we talked about earlier, my goal is to be there when that product announces. So if you send something to me even a day after product announcement, I've missed that window. So that on my totem pole of things that are important to deal with next, that goes further down that window or down that totem pole because it's no longer news. It's something that's old. So let's talk about some middle ground. Now, I'm not picking on Garmin here because there's actually cases where I can give you Garmin products across the entire spectrum of great product launches to not so great product launches, right? So great product launches, I would say the Phoenix 3, the Vivo Active, those are products that I had in advance quite a bit. I was able to work with them. A lot of early touch with those products, so that's a very well executed product launch. And then there's other product launches like the Edge Explorer, right? Just came out a couple weeks ago that I didn't have until after the product was launched. So in that case, my timing for a post, if I've missed that 7 a.m. Eastern time that Garmin always times our posts till, then I've missed it. And I'll keep doing it when I get to it. It was Eurobike week, so I got to it a day later. It's the way it works. The Edge 520 is in the middle ground, so it kind of shows you the realm of potential, what I can deliver, but it also shows you that what's left on the table. So I knew about the unit through the grapevine about a couple months in advance, roughly. I got the PR materials 36 hours before launch. I got a test unit 24 hours before launch. And then I had that 24 hours to take as many pictures as I could and use the unit a little bit there. So I went for a couple rides, but not a ton. And then at the end of the 24 hours, I gave it back, and that was it. So that was a very finite period, and it was lucky that I happened to be in town those days. But if it wasn't, then it wouldn't have worked out, and therefore I wouldn't have potentially had a post for that launch. And obviously that's a fairly big product for Garmin, and a fairly big product, I think, for the industry. A lot of people look at that product. So, there's this case it worked out, but you're kind of cutting it close, and you also cut into the quality of what the journalist could potentially deliver. So not everyone is going to turn around a 24-hour notice on a piece, including photos and all that stuff. They might just simply say, we'll get to it next time. Same in the middle ground is also the TomTom Spark. So this unit launched on September 3rd, 2015. So about 3-4 weeks ago now. And it launched at the IFA event, I think it's in Berlin. So there was no prior notice to any media, not just me, but anybody at all. They literally launched it and then sent the PR at the exact same time and said, good luck. And everyone's kind of standing around going, okay. So what happens then is that it gets to the bottom of the pile, right? Because people are busy with other things. And so there was no hands-on time. People had some booth time that they saw with the product that week while I was there, but you're not going to get much media attention because there was nothing that was pre-seeded ahead of time. So how they've recovered from that, which by the way, if you had just left the story there, that would have been a dismal launch, right? That would have been you didn't pre-seed anything with anyone, you just announced a product and didn't really answer a lot of questions about how the product worked. So they recovered a little bit. So past week in Ibiza, it's a nice warm beachy destination in the Mediterranean, they brought in 60 journalists / lifestyle bloggers / peoples and basically had them for 3 days to go ahead and use the product and get the word out. Now, some of those were major journalists from magazines, like Women's Health and things like that, and others were more Instagram, YouTube people like that would have no written presence in terms of a blog, but have a large YouTube following, 100,000 people on YouTube or Instagram or things like that. So that's kind of focusing on a very different spectrum, and that's trying to get that viral grassroots sort of style out. In this case, that's an all expense paid thing that costs them a lot of money. It's not a cheap place to be, and to fly people from all around the world, 60 people, is definitely expensive. Now, in their case, they decided that I didn't want to go to the beach, apparently. So I went to rainy London for the day and went to their headquarters on my own dime and met with their team there, the fitness team, and got to use the product and then take the product home with me. Now, obviously, I have a product now, and I wrote a post about it the next day, kind of my first run impressions with it. But at the same time, they left 3 weeks on the table, right? I didn't write about that product for 3 weeks because I don't typically write about products unless I've had my hands on them. So people ask questions, and my stock answer in their case was they're using a new optical sensor. I can't trust that optical sensor. They've added Bluetooth headphone capability. We've seen other companies add Bluetooth headphone capability with limited success in running watches. So therefore, I can't testify whether that's a good or bad product, but you'll have to wait and see, which effectively stalls shipments and interest in the product for them. So, not so ideal launches. Now, last year I gave Suunto a hard time, so I'm not picking on Suunto 2 years in a row. It just sort of happened that way. Last year I gave Suunto a hard time because their the Bluetooth Smart compatibility was dismal. And to Suunto's credit, in the 2 months following that event, they have made everything and anything compatible with the Ambit 3 they could find. They have done a superb job of going out there and basically running down issues with compatibility and fixing them as soon as they hear about them. So I give them all the credit in the world there. Unfortunately, when it comes to product launches, not so smooth. So there's something called the Suunto Traverse. You've probably never heard of it. It's actually a GPS watch. It sort of announced this summer. So it was seen on a show floor in Spain the last week of July, just out there like on your typical booth displays. And a random person on YouTube decided to make a video on it and publish the video out. Just not a media outlet, just somebody that was just strolling through the floor and saw this and made a video, kind of a hands-on walkthrough video of it. And that was it. And that was the sum total of that product launch. And then I got nothing back, and I'm like, that's weird, what is this? What's this product? And a week later, it was an outdoor retailer as well. Again, no formal product launch, just simply it's there, go check it out. So it's funny that this morning, I kid you not, this morning, I got an email from Suunto announcing the Suunto Traverse. Now, it's been at every single trade show since late July. Today they are announcing it. People have been asking about it, what it is now for 6 months, or not 6 months, 6 weeks. And now they have a website for it, but you still can't buy it. You can't buy it for another 2 weeks. In general, when you get someone's attention, you want them to execute on the action. You want them to be able to buy something. If they hear about a product today, let's just pretend they launched today, and they can't buy it for another 2 weeks, they're likely to forget about that product. So you want to get those two dates as close as possible between the point when they hear about it and when they can click the purchase button, so that you have the credit card information. If that is a large gap, then people lose interest and they forget about you. So as a result of this launch, there's been no PR. There's nothing covered in any media outlet on it. There's no attention anywhere, nothing. And the irony was, I would have actually covered the device. If they had simply told me about the device at the time frame and I had some hands-on time, I would have covered it. It's not a device that I think is spectacular based on specs, but it's certainly relevant to my space, and I think it's relevant to the larger sports technology world. So again, lessons learned here is that you want to kind of make sure that things are tied together. It shouldn't be an accident that someone finds your product out there. So remember I mentioned the half a category. So the half a category is the Hail Mary, right? This is we're just going to throw it out there and hope this works out. The Hail Mary goes to the folks to my left here, 4eyes with the precision power meter. And in their case, the Hail Mary worked out. So what it was is that last year at Eurobike, they briefed me on their power meter they were launching. And it was shown the product. At the time, wasn't even on a crank arm. It was a little football looking thing that was just kind of handled around. And then we met the night before Interbike in a hotel room, like the Springfield Suites or something. Like this whole story sounds like a drug deal, basically. The night before at like 10 o'clock, and we used a bunch of glues that you could potentially sniff, but we weren't sniffing, to attach this to the crank arm, got it installed. And the next morning at 6 a.m. we met in the middle of the desert next to a lake, and 2 minivans rolled up. And I went for a ride, right? And that was it. That was the Hail Mary of, if this product worked on the ride, that would likely, propel this product in a very successful direction. If this product failed on the ride, then that would probably be a very bad thing for a product launch. And in their case, it worked. It worked out great for that one ride, and I caveated it a million times that this is just one ride, and sometimes things go well and sometimes things don't. But they lucked out. That same day, earlier in the day, I met with Brim Brothers and their power meter doing precisely this same routine, minus the 10 p.m. in a hotel room part. And it didn't work, right? In their case, the power meter had a lot of problems on my one ride that I had with it. And that Hail Mary ended up having them cancel their product release plans. So it goes both ways. You can go in this direction and hope it works out, or not. It depends on how confident in your product you are. So that's a nice segue into sport trade shows. The things to understand about sport trade shows for me is that if I'm surprised at a trade show about your product, you failed really, really bad. I should never stumble into your booth and find something that I haven't heard about in the weeks beforehand. As a company, you shouldn't be assuming that someone's going to walk by your booth and find something. You should have sent them that material well ahead of time so I can walk in and go, okay, I need to take care of something. At the same time, almost all of the posts that I write now for Interbike and Eurobike and all these different trade shows I go to are done ahead of time. I meet with companies a weekend beforehand or weeks beforehand, and I get those products ready to go so that on announcement day at the trade show, I'm not coming visiting your booth other than maybe say hi. The post goes up automatically. So it's really important to understand is that if you're talking between big companies and mainstream media, all of that happens beforehand. For me, trade shows are about catching up with smaller companies or smaller announcements that I couldn't otherwise cover somewhere else. They're not about getting the big announcements. Those should be done well in advance. And if you go to CES, talked about CES in the last presentation there, almost all of those meetings are happening off the show floor, all the really important ones. The important ones with the journalists that you really want are somewhere else. In your group, they would be in Red Rock Canyon, or they'd be at the track, or they'd be somewhere else around town. They're not happening on the show floor. And I think probably the most important thing is to understand, your goal in these trade shows is really about ancillary media. It's about the smaller publications that you can't handhold all the time with, and getting their attention. The big ones, again, you should have already done that beforehand. So, like Paul mentioned before, who are your target platforms? Understand that. Understand, who you're trying to reach. Are you trying to reach mainstream media, things like the New York Times or Men's Health? And is that really realistic anyways? And what's your goal there? Or are you trying to reach sport-specific publications, the Bicycling, Runner's World, etc., or are you trying to reach kind of that homegrown lifestyle magazine, or not magazine, lifestyle blogs realm? Probably the most important thing, though, is to remember that you are not Apple. I hear this all the time. Apple has billions of dollars they can spend on the entire process of a launch, right? Their launch events themselves are millions and millions of dollars. So you can't duplicate that process, and you shouldn't also expect the same level of coverage, right? And Engadget or Gizmodo or TechCrunch is going to have 28 different posts about the Gadget I device that was released that day. You're not going to get 28 posts about your device, if even one, right? So you've got to figure out how does that fit into your publication plans. So here's some really simple launch day checklist stuff. These are things that I know are important to me because consumers ask me these same questions. When does your website go live, right? It's not acceptable for your website to not have information about your product that you just announced the day that you announced it, right? If your information is missing, that's a fail. That means that a consumer that wanted to buy something can't do that, right? So taking Garmin, for example, they always announce at 7 a.m. Eastern time, and I can guarantee you at 7 a.m. I can go to their site and see information about that product launch. If I can't, then how else is the consumer getting information about it? Can they actually click to purchase your product at 7 a.m. or 7:01 a.m.? Yes or no? If they can't, why not? Is it because you don't trust in the product enough yet to sell it? Then should you be announcing, right? That probably tells the consumer if you can't buy it, then maybe that product's not ready for prime time yet. Have you provided PR materials, specs, details, all that jazz to journalists? Like for me personally, I won't use any of your PR quotes, and all the pictures and all that stuff is kind of garbage to me, but I will use the spec sheets and the materials to validate what I'm saying, to make sure I haven't screwed up anywhere. I'm not going to quote it, but I'm going to go ahead and use it to make sure I haven't screwed up somewhere else. Are your retailers ready to sell your products and have their SKUs loaded? A lot of companies are afraid of giving retailers sort of the advance notice of products out there because of leaks and things like that. The vast majority of leaks don't come from retailers. They just don't, in our segment anyways. One, nobody actually cares about our segment. People care about the Apple Watch, but not a new GPS watch. It's just the reality of that. And if we look at the history of leaks in our segment, let's take Garmin for example. Garmin notifies not all, but a lot of the retailers and distributors well ahead of time of products, but their leaks over the last year, every single one of them were a self-inflicted wound, right? It was something that a website automatically published a month in advance or a week in advance accidentally. It wasn't that retailer or distributor or someone else that did that. And it wasn't a PR person either, and it wasn't a journalist somewhere else. So don't be afraid of embargoes and timelines. That's the way the world works, and that's how you get good coverage ahead of time. What's your global distribution plan? You need to have an answer on that in this day and age. People read your stuff around the world, and like Pioneer, for example, they launch power meters in Japan first, and then in Europe, and then in the US with like 4 months gaps between each one. And consumers don't think that way. Like as a company, you may try to focus on different regions, but you need to have a really crisp answer when you launch and say, we are launching here, there, and then on X, Y, and Z date. You can't simply say we are launching in Japan today, and we'll pretend nobody else exists. It just doesn't work. It's not the way the internet works anymore. So you need to have an exact plan for how to deal with that. Kickstarter projects. There's still a lot of interest in using Kickstarter. I'm not a big fan of doing that for established companies. I think that kind of basically says that you're asking for PR. If you're a new company, that's all right. Just keep in mind that the trust level of Kickstarter and related crowdfunding sites has plummeted quite a bit. So people trust Kickstarter at X level, that's fairly low, but even like sites like Indiegogo is even lower because the entry bars are lower to get into. So keep that in mind when you're choosing platforms as to which one you might choose. The Kickstarter sweet spot, if you're going to launch a product, is 3 to 4 months out. If you're launching a product, you can say it'll be available, for example, if I launched it today, be available by roughly Christmas or early January. That's a sweet spot. That's a believable timeline. That's something I can look at and go, so they're basically at production, they need the money to get through production. Versus if you tell me you're coming out next spring, then I'm looking at that going, nope, they're full of it. Because that means they haven't got to the point of prototypes and that piece where they're going to find out all those bugs yet. And of course, every Kickstarter project underestimates what that time frame will take. And then last but not least, important, just for people in this room, but anybody else who may watch later on YouTube, I do not write about Kickstarter projects unless I've had a product in hand. It's that simple. And the same is true of almost any other product out there, that 99% of the time I will not write about a product unless I've been able to physically touch it. It doesn't have to work though. It doesn't have to work like really well. It just I have to be able to judge how far along that process are they. Are they 1 month away, 6 months away, a year away? And that's why I have that requirement to physically touch something. It can be a 3D printed prototype, it can be anything you want. And that's something as well that a lot of companies are really afraid of having media take photos of a 3D printed or non-final unit. Consumers don't care. As long as it roughly looks like what the unit's going to look like, they're happy to see that versus a mocked up stock photo somewhere that they can't really get an impression on how something looks. So don't be afraid of 3D printed stuff. And the reality is the only people that even notice 3D printed stuff is the people that are engineers, and then they know how the whole process works anyways. So really, just I would focus on getting that imagery in front of people as soon as you can from a media standpoint. So a few final thoughts. Kind of the 5 most important things to me when it comes to a product release is access to the product, as I mentioned. I don't do stock and PR photos, so if I don't have photos of a product, I generally won't post about it. It's really that simple. Time to actually use the product. I don't need a month or a year for just a quick hands-on look. I just need to be able to use it and try it out and even understand how it works at a very basic level. The product actually does what it's supposed to do. So if you're checking off the box of how to get a good review, if you've claimed one thing on your literature on your site and it doesn't do that thing, that's a bad spot to be in. It needs to do what it says it's going to do. You also need to have, from my standpoint, I want to have a post out there for the second that you launch your product. Not a minute later, not an hour later, not 2 days later. If it's a day later, it's old news to the internet. So it's less likely that you're going to get attention from me because it's considered old news. So just keep that in mind. And then fast answers to clarifying questions. If I can't get answers to something, then it's really hard for me to write about it. I will hold posts if I don't have answers to questions because I'm not going to put something out that's incomplete or that I'm not clear on. So if I have to wait an extra day, then your post waits an extra day. Most importantly, the legacy of your product on the internet is based on your launch day. Hands down, all of the information you'll be able to find about your product for years to come will be written on the day you've launched your product. Probably the greatest example of that in all sports technology time is the Moto Active. The Moto Active launched initially, and there was a lot of hubbub about it. The problem was that they had, not a problem, but they had seeded people with early units, and when those people went to talk about it, they talked about battery life that was 1/10 of what the unit had claimed. And they talked about issues with the display and things like that. All those things were fixed within about a month and a half, but nobody ever rewrote about it again, right? They simply wrote about how the battery life was an hour and the display sucked and this and that. Went on to be a great little unit, but everything you ever find about Moto Active was in the first week of release. And that was one of the reasons why that product was ultimately killed, is that it just simply had too much bad press about it that sat around too long. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I don't know if we have any time, maybe.
Well, we have just an open schedule after this, so feel free.
Cool.
I'm sure there's piles of questions. Anybody else? Questions? No one's wanting to speak in front of competitors. Don't blame you. Okay, Ray.
Perfect.
Thank you
very much. I appreciate it.
Your insights and the gift.
Thank you.
You maybe give this to the girl.
Okay.
It's not for the girl, but you didn't mention her. You did put her on there.
I did brief mention, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
Again,
thank you. Yep.